Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to introduce 24RS 2626 on behalf of Equity. Period. This bill would establish a grant program to award monies to qualifying Title I schools to provide feminine hygiene products to students at no cost. We've talked a lot about putting money where it matters, and there is some data on your desk that shows that 75% of female students in public schools grades 7 through 12 are Title I, and that 1 in 4 teens in the U.S. has missed school due to lack of access to period products. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Representative. Representative Getz.
I would like to introduce 24RS 2558. And this is an act concerning education requiring school district to show academic improvement in certain student subgroups related to at-risk programs.
All right, any other further bill introduction requests? And committee, special recognition of our guest today that is subbing in today, Representative Featherston, welcome. And my ranking member, welcome. He's moving a little closer. Gonna have so much fun up here. All right. All right, everyone. We have 2 bill hearings today, and we're going to just get going. On House Bill 2489, before we open the hearing, I'll ask our reviser, Nick, to go ahead and provide an overview. You will find your bill right in front of you, so please locate along with the memorandum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee, House Bill 2489 amends the law that deals with school districts and their notice that they submit to the legislature when they choose to dispose of a school district building. So just a quick overview of what current law provides is that school districts have to submit notice to the legislature when a district intends to dispose of a school district building. The legislature, at the commencement of the regular legislative session or upon receipt of the notice, has 45 days to act upon that notice by adopting a concurrent resolution to state the legislature's intention to acquire that school district building. If the legislature does not adopt a concurrent resolution to acquire that building within that 45-day period, a school district may proceed with their disposal of the building. If the legislature does adopt a concurrent resolution choosing to acquire that building, there's a process that's set out in the law regarding the timeframes that the legislature has to act upon that intent to acquire the building. So what this bill does, House Bill 2489, it would define the term building within the law to state that building means a building that was formerly used as an attendance center. So what this would do is any school district that is going to dispose of a building that was formerly used as an attendance center would be required to notify the legislature of that intended disposal. Any other buildings that the school district intends to dispose of that were not formerly used as an attendance center would not be subject to the legislative and notice requirement. Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, committee, what questions do you have for Nick about the bill? Yes, Representative Poskin and then Representative Garber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question about the bill, as you know, since it was put in conference committee. Is there anything in the bill that speaks to like the fair market value or what price the legislature or the state intends to acquire the building at?
No, I don't believe so. So there would probably be some process and some negotiations that would have to occur if that situation plays out.
I would note that there was an Attorney General opinion on this from Chris Kobach on December 11th, 2023, and I appreciate the notice of that because I was not aware of it as well. But it does go over questions such as that, and he speaks to it, and I'm sure we can make that available to you.
So, but that would be an opinion, not what's written in the law.
Of course it is an opinion. All right, and Representative Garber and then Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So currently, aren't school districts allowed to dispose of their building that's been closed without contacting the legislature?
No, current law does require, ever since the passage of Senate Bill 113 that took effect July 1, 2023, current law does require school districts to notify the legislature of their intent to dispose of a building.
So, and you may have to, if you can, refresh my memory. Do they just have to tell them they're selling it and tell them what they did with it, or do they have to get permission to sell it in 113?
So the notice that goes to the legislature just notifies the legislature that they intend to dispose of the building, and the notice has to require a general description of the district's use of that building, the reason why the school district is disposing of that building, the legal description, the property description of the real property that the building is on, and then a copy of the resolution that the board adopted to make that disposal decision.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And yes, Representative, you'd like to go, Owsley?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Nick. I'm guessing, but I'm not certain, that attendance center is defined in statute.
This bill does not define attendance center, I mean, the common probably use of the term is where students attended, but this bill doesn't have a specific definition for attendance center. So any building that was formerly used as an attendance center, generally where students attended a school building for educational purposes, would likely fall under this definition.
I'm curious now, you know, would a field trip to the bus barn qualify as an attendance center if there was an educational opportunity there? It just seems like if we're going to define the term, we ought to define the term. Is this a machine shed or is this a garden shed? But thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, from my perspective, if you take a field trip to a bus barn, that's not an attendance center, it's a field trip. So for me, common sense, and we know the intent of the legislation is where students attended. The reason we're adding this is because last year when this portion was added, I think there was part of it that went through the Education Committee on the land acquisition, Representative Thomas's committee, and then again, the additions that came in from the Senate side were because of properties that were disposed of that were attendance centers. Kids actually went to school in those places. There was never any intent from the legislature to worry about a bus barn or shed or anything of that nature. And seeing how it was interpreted, we thus want to make that update. And again, to know why would the legislature have an interest? Because the legislature has committed between 25 to 51% of bond and interest payments, and prior to that, it was much higher in bond and interest payments. And so it is the legislature's at least duty to take a look at these before they are disposed of. So that was the intent. So if you weren't here last year or not unsure, that was the overall original intent. Any questions? Yes, Representative McNorton?
Thank you, Chairman, or Chairwoman. So is this attendance center any time in the history? So if there's a school district that's had a grade school that's been sitting empty for 10 years or whatever, because they had a bond issue, built, consolidated some grade schools, where's that at?
Yes, it actually does not specify any years. If the legislature, or if there was an amendment that you wanted it in the last 1 or 2 years, you could do so. I think another thing to keep in mind is there was an announcement in the Wichita Eagle today, and it said that they were going to have multiple school closures, maybe 5 or more school closures. Those attendance centers are very hard to reconstruct or use in other purposes. Repurposing a school is not easy. You can maybe make it into some kind of apartments, but usually or generally they're kind of designed for schools. But what has happened in the past, forgive me if I'm wrong, but understanding from Wichita board members is that they have a guide or they have a board rule or board policy that does not permit them to lease or sell a building to another school. So let's say the diocese wanted to purchase it or lease it, or a homeschool or a private school wanted to purchase or lease it. They would let it be unoccupied, and they could let it be unoccupied for a long period of time. So I'm not sure if that would be up to this committee on the intent and what you wanted to accomplish with it. You could put a year time frame on an amendment, or you could say, you know what, an attendance center should be available. So Okay, other questions for Revisor? Yes, Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in one of the districts I represent, the administration building also has specialty programs where children do attend regularly. Would that make that entire building an attendance center?
Well, like I was speaking to Representative Owsley's question, attendance center is not defined, specifically a percentage of how much the building is used for student attendance or anything of that nature. So the bill draft says if the building was used formerly as an attendance center, it shall be subject to the legislative notice process.
And just hypothetically, Nick, if a school district had, for example, an administrative center, they had a few classes in it at some point in history, and they chose to dispose of the property, and they did not let's say this passed into law, they did not let the legislature know, wouldn't it be incumbent on the legislature to say whether or not that this was acceptable? Because if the legislature had the intent of attendance center, what would the penalty be for that district for disposing of the property without alerting the legislature in that particular case?
That's a good question. Yeah, this provision doesn't have any penalty for going around the law. I assume that there would, the legislature may have some type of legal option to file an injunction against that school district to prohibit that action of disposing of the building without complying with this law. But that's just kind of off the top of my head.
And that's what I was thinking, is that the legislature would have to take some legal action in stopping it. So you have that type of common sense stopgap as well. And certainly, again, the intent is not to take a little tiny piece of a building and make that subject to the law. It is about a school. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Nick. Committee, we will go ahead and officially move on and open the hearing of House Bill 2489, limiting the legislative option to purchase school district buildings, two buildings that were formerly used as attendance centers. We are going to welcome now Representative Brett Fairchild. This is something from District 113 that came up in his district, and he did touch base with me this summer, and he very much wanted to correct it. So welcome.
Appreciate the opportunity to testify in front of your committee today. A lot of what I was going to say has already been said, but I'll just give the background on this. Several months ago, the superintendent of St. John High School, Josh Meyer, contacted me about a problem or an issue that they were having, and they were trying to get a shed sold on their property, and they weren't able to do that right away. And obviously, you know, the revisor explained the reason for that, because they have to notify the legislature first, and then there's a right of first refusal where the legislature has the right to buy the building, and then after that there's a 45-day period that they have to wait before they can either sell or close down the building. And I don't know if this was, I don't remember if this was mentioned or not, but at least the superintendent told me that the 45-day clock actually starts when the legislature convenes in January. And so, like, if a school district wants to close down or sell a building in June or July, you know, they can't start that process yet. They have to start that process in January when the legislature actually convenes, and then that 45-day clock doesn't actually start until the legislature actually convenes in January. And then it was also discussed, you know, as far as why that original provision was put in there. In addition to what Representative Williams said, I was also basically told that, you know, we aren't necessarily looking to buy any of these buildings. We just want to have that option just in case these buildings are left vacant. You know, it's not very likely that we'll ever buy one of these buildings, but if they're not actually doing anything with the building, if the building is just left vacant, then we just want to have the option to buy the building in that situation. But it's very obvious that the original intent of this bill was only meant to apply to attendance centers. It was obviously not meant to apply to all buildings, and, you know, you can see some of the unintended consequences of how the bill was originally drafted, where the language in it wasn't completely clear, where the language could possibly apply to all buildings and not simply attendance centers. And so after my superintendent contacted me about this, and I contacted Representative Williams, and as she said, she and I have worked together on this bill, she contacted the reviser and asked him about the claims that were made by my superintendent that this language was not written clearly and may need to be changed. And he basically agreed, and the reviser basically said that the language, at the best, very best, wasn't very clear, and then it needed to be cleared up. And so that's basically, just what this bill is. It's just a very technical, minor change. We're just trying to clean up the language and correct a problem that was in the bill from last year. Basically, this was just, I think, a provision in the education bill from last year, not a specific bill. But, this is just something that we need to get corrected and changed, just a technical change, and I'll stand for any questions.
And since you may have another committee that you need to go to, I will entertain questions for Representative Fairchild right now, if anyone has a question. All right, you get off easy. Thank you for coming. And since I see Cheryl in the back, I just want to give her a shout out because Cheryl Semmel is the one that provided me the Attorney General review or opinion of this particular law. So we'll pass it along to you all so you can take a look at it, because there may be some items, as you mentioned, that may not be as clear, and if we can make it more clear, let's make it more clear. All right, committee, well, any other proponents that we may have missed? Any other proponents? Okay, great. We're going to move on to neutral. We have Leah Fleiter from KASB. And this is neutral testimony, and I believe our only neutral.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, I just wanted to pull up my document. That happened a little more quickly than I thought it would. So we are here today to appear as neutral on House Bill 2489. Our member-adopted policies that were approved in November by our voting delegates state that we would support the legislature calling for either the repeal, or if not the repeal, then the significant clarification of the provisions of Senate Bill 113 of 2023 on the disposition of district property. So that's where our neutral testimony today springs from. And we appreciate that this bill is trying to narrow that very broad piece that was put in. We all know it's a struggle during conference committees to get everything narrowed down to the way we might want it to be. And so we certainly welcome that. We still feel, however, that it is rather broadly worded and could apply to any kind of school district structure building. And so whether that was the intent or not, some clarification would certainly be welcome, and we appreciate that. We do note that we have schools across our state that could have formerly been an attendance center, but might now be used for a different purpose. And so technically, this could still apply to those buildings, even if they haven't been an attendance center for maybe a decade. And so just any clarification of that would also be certainly appreciated. So unfortunately, the bill does not repeal the entire property provisions of Senate Bill 113, which is a priority of our members. And so we have been asked to state our concern about the time frame that's already been discussed here, that you could give the legislature your notice that you wish to dispose of a building, but then worst case scenario, it could be, I think we have in our testimony, a year and a half after the board passes the resolution to sell Leah Fleiter Elementary School, before the legislature would have to act on it. So our members would certainly, I know I see Representative Hill saying, why would they name an elementary school after her? Never while a person is alive, probably. So that is something that our members would like to see addressed, and you've already heard that from some conferees today, that to make it a little more in line with a little more, make it a little more effective and efficient for districts to accomplish this piece of the law if it is not to be repealed. And so we, again, the Attorney General's opinion came out in December, and of course, we all jumped on it right away to see what it said. And we do note that he did state that it should be, that fair market value should be a consideration. And so we certainly appreciated that. We do want to note that given that many district properties are paid for and improved solely with local tax dollars, not with bond or interstate aid from the state, the ambiguity in the statute about fair market value and whether the legislature should have control over those buildings is certainly concerning. And we acknowledge that the Attorney General concluded that a state agency would need to pay what a willing buyer would propose to pay. But again, with this timeline, this extended timeline, I don't know how many willing buyers would still be willing after a year and a half. And so obviously that's a concern for us. So we would like to see this bill substantially amended. The minimal changes in the bill as it's currently written don't address the substantial burdens, unfortunately, that the law places on local taxpayers and on school districts. And so, again, our members would urge the legislature to either repeal or significantly clarify this extremely broad statute. So thank you, and we look forward to working with the legislature and the committee on addressing the root issue that was behind this provision being placed into Senate Bill 113 and protecting the interests of everyone involved. Do you want me to take questions now? Or?
Yes, yes. Wait, Leah, you're the only neutral testimony. We'll make sure that we didn't miss anyone, any neutral testimony that we perhaps missed. All right, so yes, questions committee for Leah. No questions. You did such a fantastic job.
We appreciate the opportunity.
I will ask you a couple questions, and it's really, you bring up a good point. You talk about improvements are not made by the state, but the capital improvements are equalized. Schools can go up to 8 mills, and then those are equalized by average valuation per pupil. So many of those improvements are equalized to state, but because you said that, it made me think that not all of them are equalized, nor are all the capital investments equalized. There are some school districts that get zero. And so that may be something that we consider. Should those schools that are not getting an equalization for their bond and interest have to be subject to this? And I think you could argue either way, but I think there's a good case to be not.
And Madam Chair may remember, because you've been involved in this work for many years now, there's that formula where you peg aid to Leavenworth, and they don't have taxable property. And there's been some adjustments to that throughout the years. But again, I agree with you, that might be something to look at.
All right, so committee, when we're having these discussions, there might be things in your mind in terms of amendments or changes to make it improve. I would recommend that you speak to your colleagues so that there aren't like 15 amendments of the same thing, because our revisers do take your requests and maintain your confidentiality during that process, I believe. And so we can't tell you, hey, that's a great idea, but Representative Garber already had it, So if you would talk to one another, it will save time for our committee as we work through these. All right, committee, we'll close the neutral section and we'll move on to the opponent section. We have Corey Gibson, Superintendent of USD 232, DeSoto. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. And certainly I want to share that I am in opposition of the bill because I didn't think it went far enough. But there's some great conversations happening that enlightens and also share some perspective that maybe there's some amendments that could be made to make it more agreeable. Just to share a few things, I am the proud superintendent of USD 232, which serves DeSoto and 100 square miles, of course, including DeSoto. We have about 7,500 students, and we also provide support for Lenexa, Olathe, and Shawnee, part of those districts. So within my written testimony, I did provide some quotes from the Attorney General's opine, or his opinion, because I think that might help guide the conversation going forward to some concerns we have out in the field as well. And so when looking at the law as it's written right now, there are 4 areas of concern specific that I'd like to share. There does exist a lack of understanding as the intent of the law. I've already learned a little bit more in this committee meeting than I've maybe read in the law itself. I do think there are challenges for districts related to the timeline as it's prescribed. I do think it has a negative impact on transparency at the local level. And I think there might be some challenges of good faith and fair dealing between the state and local school boards. So some questions you may want to consider as you begin your work on this is, under what provisions should the state have the right of first refusal for any school property sold, particularly if the school property was constructed and maintained through the use of local taxpayer dollars or even gifted to the district? How many potential buyers are willing to wait for the process to go through the legislative body? Who should pay for the building upkeep and utilities while legislators consider the property? How do local communities weigh in on the potential best use of the property going forward? And lastly, how do we increase transparency so others have an equal opportunity to purchase the property as well as to negotiate in good faith and fair dealing? Although it's ambiguous in the law today, I do appreciate the fact that we are attempting to clarify what is an attendance center. But I'd like to provide two specific examples of my own experiences as to how this may have played out in the past and how this may impact the future. Formerly, I was the superintendent of Valley Center School District, where I served for 11 years. And during that time, we did dispose of a property prior to this law. In that case, we want to be very transparent because many people wanted the property. So we went through a process of an open meeting, having discussions about it, taking action, and then chose the path of literally an auction, which then allowed anyone in the community an equal opportunity to partake in the process. And I know that in that process, at the end of the day, the community appreciated being the transparency that exists. I don't know how that would play out with the current law. The second relates to our current situation in USC 232. We have a property, Countryside School, which has not operated as an attendance center, in other words, students not present, for 14 years. However, it's within half a mile of the Panasonic plant. And this summer, developers came to us, multiple, to have a conversation about that proximity is ideal for some of the things that they needed on the spot right now in order to move the Panasonic building and construction going forward. And so that presented a challenge because we then explained the law as to we can't just go through the normal process and dispose of the building. And as a result, the developer said, it's not desirable, we need it now, we cannot wait any longer. And so that presents a problem as we exist. Now, the reason we kept the property was, at the time, we currently use it for storage, but at the time it was thought that someday the district may wish to have a school on that property, but no longer. The Panasonic plant traffic and so forth will not make that the best ideal situation for us. And so I'm just sharing a specific example to us as we're dealing with today. We did work with Senator Gossage this summer, who also engaged the Attorney General to opine if it's even possible to do a land transfer, whether options exist, and we cannot come to resolution. So certainly I urge the members of the committee and the entire legislative body to oppose the bill as written today, but I recommend even appealing the law if possible, and if not, significant revisions are necessary to move forward. I appreciate your service to our great state. What questions might you have?
All right, thank you. We only have 2 providing testimony, so we can go ahead and take questions with each. Normally we don't, but you're standing right there. It might be easy with the crowd in our audience today. Questions, committee. Yes, Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For most of us, when we walk into this building, the first words we hear are unintended consequences. And, these are further along and much more in-depth than I had even considered. It seems to me, and I don't know if you would agree with this, that the bill basically artificially deflates the fair market value of school district buildings because of that potential waiting period, and that reduces the number of willing buyers, which then, in a free market, deflates the value of the property. Would you agree?
Could. I don't want to speak to that would always, because every situation may be different, but certainly it might, because once again, the previous situation went through an auction process, it's transparent, it's open, it's highest bidder. So I don't think that could play out as the law is written now.
Well, thank you so much for bringing all of those concerns to the committee. We really need to take a good look at this. Thank you.
I would think that your property near Panasonic would be a hot commodity, and you're going to be having a problem of increased enrollment, and you're going to be coming in here next year if the governor vetoes that again and asking for us to please pass current year funding. And when you do sell that property, I think it's going to be worth a little bit more than it was yesterday or prior to Panasonic. The other thing is, I don't see very many schools as hot commodities, but could you just speak real quick about the auction? What type of building was it in Valley Center?
Yeah, in that case, it had been used for multiple different things. At the end, it was a transportation facility. It was more of a land, and we just used the part of the building. So at that point, it would not, in the current law, it may be gray, right? Because we're not quite sure what a building is. In the recommended, that would make it a non-attendance center, at least far back as I knew. So in that case, it was a different.
Okay, so it was prominently land that was valuable. It wasn't the attendance center, which usually they sit there forever and they just become empty little, shells. And ideally, it would be great if kids were in it, no matter if it was a private or a public school. Just let's get those buildings used. So, any other questions, committee? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Next, we have Dr. Dawn Johnson, Superintendent from 308 North, from Hutchinson. Oh, written only. Oh, my apologies. Yep, thank you. It takes a team to make this all work up here. All right, thank you. Do we have any other opponent testimony that we perhaps missed? No? All right, committee, just make sure you take a moment to look at the written testimony. And with that, I will go ahead and close the hearing. No, so today is the hearing, and so when we work it, we'll discuss it. Did you want to ask questions? You can ask questions today, but today is the opportunity to hear from the proponent's opponents, and sometimes as chair, I kind of opine too, but it's not a discussion day, unless you have a question. He's thinking. But you will have an opportunity to discuss it because this bill and our other bills do not pass out of this committee without discussion. Yes, sir.
Superintendent from DeSoto.
All right.
I no longer represent your district, but I was very much aware of your interest in this. So in the Basehor Linwood School District down in Linwood, we have an attendance center that's now been vacant a couple of years. And so what do we do with it? And you had talked about a auction. Did you have a public hearing before that too?
Yeah, we opened it up to the board to have a discussion. They passed a resolution after having community input, and from there, we went to an auction.
The other thing was, I just learned today, and my intern has been working. It was just this morning we got a request on our facility in Linwood, and people wishing to make it into a child care center. And the school district is looking to sell it apparently to developers for houses. So is that kind of problems you had?
We really didn't. We just had a lot of different interests in the particular site that we had. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone had an equal opportunity within the provisions we had set forth.
DeSoto is a great school district. I enjoyed it representing you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's difficult to compete child care center with the developers, isn't it? But yes, those are great questions, and perhaps, an auction, if it were selected by an open hearing and a resolution, and it was open to anyone, maybe that would be one avenue to exit this pathway. So good questions. Thank you very much. I will now close the hearing on House Bill 2489, and we're going to move to House Bill 2506. And before we open the hearing, we will invite our reviser to provide an overview. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So committee, House Bill 2506 deals with the Kansas State High School Activities Association. And this relates to virtual student participation in school district activities. So I will note, currently, Keisha's policy online requires a virtual student, a student who's attending a virtual school in the state, to take a minimum of 1 credit hour excuse me, in the student's resident school district in order to participate in an activity within that school district. So what this bill would do is it would essentially back that policy down to such that the virtual student would no longer be required to be enrolled in a minimum of 1 credit hour in that resident school district. Generally, a virtual student would be on the same standing as what the legislature passed into law within the last year or 2 years, I'm trying to remember, regarding non-public school participation in KSHA activities. So a virtual student would still have to attend a virtual school, comply with vaccination requirements, meet general age and eligibility requirements that are otherwise set by KSHA that aren't in conflict with the statute, pay any required activity fees that are imposed by the school district, and then in addition to that, I'd like to also point out that the law does state that a school district or a virtual student still may be required to enroll in a class within the school district to participate in an activity if that class is required for participation upon all other students. So similar to the non-public school participation requirement, if a class is required, such as band, debate, that virtual student may still be required to be enrolled in the school district and enroll in that class. But otherwise, a virtual student would be able to participate in their resident school district without a minimum credit hour requirement. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, great. Committee, questions for Nick? No questions for Nick. All right. Actually, we do have one. Representative Ousley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again, Nick. So they've got to comply with the requirements of vaccinations, age eligibility, pay, and in some instances could be required to take a particular class, but overall there's no academic level or standard to participate in the sports. Like I know, some sports when you participate in them, you've got to carry a GPA to participate. And there's nothing mentioned in here about that.
So the law does state that the student would still have to comply with the applicable age and eligibility requirements that are set forth by the KSHA. So those academic eligibility requirements would still apply to these virtual students who are participating in activities.
And this would basically override what KSHA is doing today.
This would currently the KSHA policy requires these students to be enrolled in a minimum of one class at the resident school district that they're participating in. And this would state that there shall not be a minimum enrollment requirement except for those classes that are required upon all other students if they're going to participate in an activity such as band, debate type of thing.
Okay. Thank you. I look forward to the testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. And just a reminder that KSHA does have a requirement. You need to pass 5 credits, so you need to have at least 5 Ds to participate. Each school district can have their own standard, and these are virtual public schools. So these virtual public school students are also achieving credits for classes, and those that would be required to be reported to the school district to be sure that they are meeting their required goals. All right, if there are no other questions, thank you very much. And we'll officially open House Bill 2506, authorizing students enrolled in virtual schools to participate in activities that are regulated by the Kansas State High School Activities Association at such student's resident school district without a minimum enrollment requirement in such resident school district. Our first proponent and only proponent in person is Melinda Holmes. Welcome, Melinda. She is K-12 principal from Mays Virtual Prep School, and thank you for reaching out. And we welcome you here today.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Melinda Holmes. I'm the K-12 principal of Mays Virtual Preparatory School in Mays, Kansas, and we have about 500 kids, K through 12, in our school. This is something I deal with each week. I have students, parents who come to me and ask if they can be doing KSHA. They want to run cross country. They want to do the activities that the other kids are doing. And I have to deny them from being allowed to do it. And here's the reason why. Because it requires dual enrollment. And that on the surface seems like no big deal. Well, just let them take that one class. But there is a part-time funding penalty with virtual where our funding is cut in half immediately if I allow a student to be enrolled part-time. So immediately my funding's cut in half, and then I get an FTE of that. So a student from the $5,600 that it costs and that we get funded per student, it would drop down to 2,200 or something just from that student taking that one class. So that is the reason we can't allow dual enrollment. So this would allow, for many of the activities, me to allow those students to participate in their local school district and to be able to do those activities. I'm sure you're going to see a written testimony from some of my kids. People, those are just people who talked to me last Friday, and you can see that some of those parents are very passionate about providing that opportunity. We are a very rigorous academic virtual school, and our kids are very, very successful. And these kids would be a great asset to any of the local schools as well. So, any questions?
Yes, we'll go ahead and open up for questions. Anyone for Melinda? Yes, Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you restate why you can't allow dual enrollment?
Okay, so the funding formula for part-time virtual, and part-time is defined as anything less than full-time. So one class would make that student a part-time virtual student because they would go into the brick and mortar class one day, you know, it could be 20 minutes, it could be 60 minutes, but they move from a full-time to a part-time. So that part-time formula takes my funding at 5,600 and immediately takes it to half. Then it's an FTE. So let's say a student is enrolled with 80.8 time with us and 0.2 in the local brick and mortar. The funding would then go to the local brick and mortar at that 0.2 percentage, and the funding would go to half of our funding and then 0.8 of that half. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Funding.
Yes.
Yes.
So what it puts me in a place is I'm still supporting that student with teachers, I'm still supporting that student with technology, I'm still supporting that student with curriculum, and I can't allow it. It just doesn't work. We go in the hole.
And that's something this bill does not address, committee. So if that's something that you feel is unparalleled, there's a lack of parity between those students that go to a virtual versus a brick and mortar, because the brick and mortar schools, we do allow for these different percentages. And if they're going a certain number of hours, then they get a certain amount of pay. And versus the virtual, it's either all, half, or nothing. And generally, if your students want to participate in a sport, most school districts do not have a required weightlifting. They might prefer it, but there's not a requirement. The only time that you would run into a bind would be if they wanted to participate in band, and
orchestra,
sometimes
choir,
sometimes debate also would require you to be part of a class. So if that's something that anyone in here is passionate about, again, that is something that can be reviewed and amended.
Okay.
Any other questions? And thank you for providing so many different written testimony. Yes, we have another question. Representative McDowell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to make sure I understand this, so if a student with this new bill, they don't have to transfer or do the part-time is what we're saying, just to make sure?
So for example, if I had a student who wanted to run cross-country, they would not have the requirement to be enrolled in the other school, so they could run cross-country.
You lose your funding because they aren't enrolling in a class.
Right, so it wouldn't affect them. The issue it would be is if it was band, that is a class-related, so the student still wouldn't be able to do it, but it would take care of a majority of those activities.
And just recall last year that if you were a non-public school student, you needed to take 5 credits at a public school in order to participate. And if you took more than, I believe, 2 credits, you couldn't participate in your homeschool activity. So it was kind of like an unparalleled situation. Again, this is also a similarly non-parallel situation where it kind of benefits the brick and mortar, but it doesn't benefit the virtual if we had a situation where one class was taken. Representative Poskin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very quick. So this bill would not fully address your problem, but if we change the funding, it would.
impact.
Okay, thank you.
It is a step in the right direction is what something I deal with every week. And so I appreciate you taking this up. Thank you.
Yes, Representative McDonald.
During the pandemic, my children participated in virtual school as well. They're back in brick and mortar now, but I really do appreciate the nuance that they're bringing forward here, because our virtual school in Olathe eventually closed because of this funding issue. And for our family, it was a really good fit. So I think it's something we should look at, because virtual schools shouldn't be punished to the degree that they are. We should make the choice that gives us more choices. So I appreciate you being here today.
All right, I love it. And again, committee, we've got a lot of good ideas circulating, so please talk to one another. Obviously, do not break Kansas Open Meetings Act or Kansas Open Records Act, but please, if you're just one or two of you, you absolutely can make communication and make provisions for make something better. All right, thank you. If there are no other proponents in the audience, please note all of the lengthy number of written testimony, and it sounds like some of those are students and parents. And I certainly received a lot of emails, because people are very, very passionate about their extracurricular activities. And so that's awesome. We would rather them do that, be on their phone. Moving on to neutral, we have Bill Faflick, and Bill is here. You want to come on up? Bill and I have been exchanging emails, and so he'll update the committee on Keisha and where they are.
Madam Chair, Committee, thank you for the opportunity to spend time with you today and to share a perspective from the Kansas State High School Activities Association. Earlier this week, written testimony was provided. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to review that. And just a quick note, I won't read through that testimony. Clearly that's there for your reference as we move forward. But the Activities Association adopts through a three-branch government, a legislative, an executive, and a judicial branch, much like the United States government, policies and procedures that govern our Activities Association. We write rules, and we adhere and agree to follow those rules to serve the 752 member schools and nearly 200,000 students that are involved in secondary schools across Kansas. Each of those adopted rules are intended to support academic achievement, it's intended to support student growth. And with that, this legislation impacts that eligibility standard, and with that, we're okay. As an association, we believe that we navigated last year some very challenging changes, and we adopted a process that allowed kids to have the opportunity, but in that process, the word that Representative Hoskins has heard, and we'll say again, is unintended consequences. It created some dual standards, and we want to eliminate those just as you do, but we needed a little bit of time to evaluate, to study, and to process forward with that. One of those is this double standard between a student that's in a non-public school, virtual or member, as well as those that are attending a virtual school like Mays that is a publicly funded virtual program. We believe that that 1 hour requirement should be removed of attendance. We certainly want to do no harm to those virtual schools with funding. We do respectfully ask that you maintain the ability for debate programs, speech programs, all of our music programs, orchestra, band, and vocal music, as well as some of our schools that offer some of the other performing arts, cheer and dance, as well as classes in the day, to have those as requirements for membership on the team, if that's withheld, if that's maintained for all of the students in that program. So we totally agree with that and believe that our board will take that action as we move forward. And with that, we'll just simply ask that this bill not be moved out of committee, because we're going to take that action in and of ourselves after this first year of study. We actually can get there a little bit sooner than that, but the bill came up now, and certainly we're able to provide that testimony. Some of those unintended consequences that we have include the double standard, includes that dual eligibility that I had mentioned before. We have students now that are attending some of our private schools that are members of the association and members of of neighboring states' private schools that live in Kansas that come back and participate in programs. That gives them eligibility in 2 different schools at the same time. You could be eligible here in Topeka, at Topeka Hayden, as well as at Topeka High, and they have to pick between that. That unintended consequence there has actually caused some of our member private schools to shut down programs because they've lost kids to that public school. And so now they can't offer a soccer program because they don't have enough bodies remaining at their small private school in order to offer that for students that are attending their school and part of that school community. So with that, the Activities Association is fine. We believe we'll take the action. Our governing board meets again in March, and I anticipate, obviously, we provide a significant review each time to all legislative issues, and this would be one that would be right at the top of the action items for our governing board. So I thank you for the opportunity to come before you today and stand ready to answer questions when that time is appropriate.
And I think it's now, unless there's anybody else that's offering neutral testimony. Committee questions for Bill? Yes, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So here's my question. I have a granddaughter. She is now at Lutheran High, which is on the Missouri side, just over the state line. Are you telling me then, private school, could she actually come over to Johnson County and compete? Did I hear that?
Where does she live?
She lives in Overland Park.
We have students from Rockhurst High School in Missouri competing in Kansas schools right now.
Let me just note that the Kansas law that allows for school district to have students that pay half base aid for them to come into Kansas. It is part of our formula. If you're going to allow students to come in from out of state and be part of the formula, which was approved in 2017, then you also have to allow them to participate. That has nothing to do with this bill. Keisha is simply adhering to what formula was already established.
Could I just, one little more question? So like Rockhurst can compete over in Kansas if they live there. Is that what I heard?
A Rockhurst student. Now, what that does to their eligibility with my counterparts at the Missouri Association, I believe it's compromised, but I don't have any authority to write rules for the Missouri State High School Activities Association, but I know they've responded.
Are any of those Rockhurst students being recruited by, say, a parochial school in Johnson County?
That would be, I mean, recruiting aside, that's not possible under this legislation because this legislation only impacts students coming to public schools. So a Johnson County private school has no students that are not attending full-time students.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely don't deal with the competition, but we know that our public schools recruit from public schools because it happens in my area all the time, especially in wrestling and other high-intense sports. And so it happens, and you know, you can't make the world perfect. But anyway, other questions for Mr. Flappick? Yes, Representative Getz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine is just kind of a clarify what you said, that you would like to just take care of this on your own. And
Yes, sir.
And how exactly would you do that?
We would modify the existing policy. I think I provided that in my written testimony. Just strike what I believe is line 4 of our online policy for eligibility of virtual students. And we would remove that requirement of attending that one class, with the exception of the band, the orchestra, the vocal music student who needs to be in that class because they're going to be preparing for performances and festivals with their peers, and that's when those students are meeting for their instruction and their rehearsals.
And if we went ahead and did it and did a funding fix amendment as well, would that disrupt what you would do then? I mean, it would force it, but you would still do what you're going to do, correct?
Yes, sir. My sense is we'll take care of that before this legislative session ends. We have no funding from the from the state of Kansas, so I don't get into the funding. We try to do no harm, certainly, but I certainly would support anything that would provide resources to our public schools for kids who are participating in their programs. It's expensive to participate in activities, whether it's instrumental music or whether it's football. Every time a kid puts a football helmet on, it costs $300 for that school to equip that student just on the helmet, just on the headwear. So yeah, it's important that we provide that support for our member schools.
And thank goodness those kids' parents are paying lots of property tax. So they are contributing to their school district regardless of whether their child goes to that school. So that's a wonderful thing. Representative Estes?
I can see where you're coming from, but if you look at it from our side, you have your piece of the pie and we need to take care of the whole pie. We still have to come up with a funding fix. And if we don't know what you're doing in March, we run out of time to do something now. So can you appreciate that we kind of have an issue where we've got to deal with it at some point, you know, before you deal with it?
Yes, ma'am, I understand the timing of this. I think you have a commitment from the High School Activities Association, the things that you've asked us to do, the things that we say we're going to do. We have a pretty good track record.
We're just on unparalleled timelines. Thank you.
Well, and there's no harm in codification. So if we're in agreement that this is important, which I think we are in agreement, I think you originally said you wanted to have a study and maybe have some more time, and we're kind of a little bit more on an expedited path, but we all are going to get there in the same place. That's a great thing. Then in essence, we're just codifying what they're going to do. And I think that's always a good thing to have things in statute. We do historically in the legislature even codify things from the State Board of Education, their accreditation, their standards. We're not setting them, but we're codifying them. So I think that there's some interesting things that are being brought up today that really parallel and could work together. Representative McDonald.
Just a really quick question, Madam Chair. I see the last line says that this will take effect and be enforced when it's published in the statute book. I mean, that would be pretty quick. And so I'm wondering if that would jive with your timelines for, you know, I'm not a sport person, but I gather there's seasons. I certainly understand debate has seasons and that sort of thing banned. So would us doing this with or without a dollar fix, how does that impact your timeline in a practical way?
It probably has zero impact, respectfully, because I think that, again, we'll probably make that eligibility decision prior to the publication of the statute book.
And it would be in effect right then.
Right. And part of the reason for that and us moving in March is, you know, we're 2/3 of the way. We wanted a year to study. Well, we've learned enough in 2/3 of the year on this particular issue that our third season, our spring season, may have a positive impact.
Excellent, thank you.
And the statute's July 1, so it's really the perfect time. They can move forward, and it's a great transition. Representative Thomas? Okay, quick question for you, and I think that there were no other questions. So you shared with the interim committee that there were 200 students that were able to participate in the fall from what we passed last year, which opened it up to all non-public school students. Do you have those numbers for your winter students?
I have a total, yes, ma'am. Obviously, we have an update, and I informed our board at our last meeting in earlier in January that thus far there have been 338 students approved, 338 seasons of activities approved, 315 students, because we have some duplicate kids that participate in fall and winter activities. The breakdown is roughly 50-50 between 7 and 8, or middle school, junior high, and high school 9 through 12.
That's really exciting that 315 students that were never able to participate prior are now involved in their community. That's a win for the community, a win for the families, a win for the kids, win for the public schools. It's just a great thing. I do know that there are a lot of people that still don't know that this is law. And so I'm sure you probably promote it on your website, but it is also incumbent upon all of us to share that information, even in your school districts, if you're a school board member, to attract more kids to participate. I know that in our school district of 4A, there were never enough debate kids. You could always use more band kids, kids that were doing any of those scholastic activities, and even some of the sports as well. There just weren't enough. So it's a great thing. So thank you very much for giving your testimony today. We look forward to working with you on it. All right, committee, we are at our last and final section of our committee. We have Leah Fleiter again, and she is an opponent representing KASB.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's been great thus far to be up here and be neutral. It's been, it's been a great opportunity, and we appreciate that. But in this case, based on our member adopted policy, we are appearing today in opposition to this bill. And that is because again, I talk about our member adopted policy a lot. That's what drives our lobbying here in the State House. And we have positions in support of local control of district activities, as well as deference to the ks's oversight of school activities and athletics. And so that's a major driver of our opposition today. But unfortunately, we also feel that this bill is fundamentally unfair to public school students, and it prioritizes extracurriculars over academics. And so bear with me while I talk about that. House Bill 2506 would allow private virtual school students to participate in public school extracurricular activities without complying with the same academic standards as their public school counterparts. This is unfair to the public school students who want to participate in the extracurricular activities that are such a valuable part of the educational experience. We've heard some great testimony already today. I think we're all in favor of extracurriculars and what they do for kids. But this bill, unfortunately, expects public school students to follow the rules, but it excuses virtual school students from following most of those rules. And also, unfortunately, under a possible interpretation of the bill, the local brick and mortar public school students could actually be excluded or cut from extracurricular activities in favor of virtual school students who don't even attend one of the virtual schools that are located here in Kansas, let alone in their local community. And I would like to explain that if I may. So HB 2506, as it's currently written, would allow students enrolled in any virtual school in Kansas to participate in local public school activities, as we've discussed. But the way it's drafted, that does not exclude virtual schools that are run by other organizations outside the state of Kansas. For example, a student could live in Junction City, and they could attend a virtual school that's based in Georgia or Missouri or any other number of some of those nationwide virtual school providers, and they would be allowed to participate in extracurriculars in Junction City without meeting the Junction City requirements for academic progress or achievement, unless it's the band or the debate, as we've already talked about. So we really feel that's fundamentally unfair to those students and to their taxpayer parents. And so we think it might be a drafting error. There's a reference in there to 72-3212, and we think maybe it was supposed to be 3712. So it could just be a drafting error. And if that's the case, then we would respectfully just ask for a revision for that. But again, when we come down to it, the public school extracurricular activities, I know Representative Johnson, former football coach, I know you still are pretty active, aren't you, in Basehor-Linwood? You're at least a booster, right? That, it's those Friday night lights things of high school debate, high school sports, and then we also have debate, forensic, drama, as we've discussed. They're an important part of communities, large and small, across our state. And we feel that if Kansans wish their students to have the benefits of participating in those activities, those students should do so while meeting the expectations of local public school boards and the KSHA. And honestly, too, at the end of the day, while our members vigorously support extracurriculars and provide quite a number of those activities for our students, at the end of the day, we feel that this bill promotes activities over academics. And so we feel that, unfortunately, not only is it unfair, it's also bad for all students involved, because at the end of the day, as much as we all love our extracurriculars, academics should be our primary focus. And so we would ask you to respectfully oppose the bill, and I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
All right, I think you are the only opposition. And so we'll open up for questions now. Committee, what questions do you have for Leah? And I will apologize, the wrong bill is out. That bill, bring that one back tomorrow. The actual bill number is 2506. So if you pull that up, you can look at that and you can double check any of the language. Representative Estes.
Thank you for being here. I'm sitting here processing what you're saying. And would you agree that the parents of those virtual students are paying their share of taxes? So do you think we create a second class of kids that, hey, your parents are still paying taxes, and even after you're done, your parents are still going to pay taxes, but you didn't get that option on the menu because you fall into this category?
Their parents are certainly paying the taxes, that's true. There's some nuance there. If you are, say you live in, okay, I live in Manhattan, so you live in Riley, but you are attending the Manhattan virtual school and you want to participate, your parents are paying USD 378 legislative option budget taxes. And those are what is intended to pay for extracurriculars. They are not paying the much higher USD 383 LOB tax levy for extracurriculars. And so they are certainly paying those taxes, but are they paying the LOB taxes that provide for those extracurriculars that we all agree are so important?
To know
that
that
make
they
sense?
are actually, they must be a resident student. So if I'm paying.
No, but not the way the bill's drafted right now.
No. I mean, if there's a technical correction, but the bill that passed last year, you must be a resident in the school district in which you are participating. That means that you are paying taxes, whether or not it's through a lease or your parents have a home. So that is a requirement. So that is not the same, I don't know what analogy, I just wanted to clarify. They are paying taxes, the full taxes, just like anyone else. And I'm sorry for interrupting, Representative Estes. Did you want to continue?
No, I mean, you clarified what I thought I remembered in my mind, but, so that's my hesitancy with your position.
Okay.
And we can continue to talk.
Right, and I think also, though, again, those parents are paying taxes, but so are the parents of the brick and mortar kids who are required to be making academic progress and comply with the requirements that the virtual school students are not. And I think if you think about your local school board, if you have two kids, both of their parents are, let's say for sake of argument, paying the same taxes, it should be a local board decision, you know, to you could say, prioritize the kids who are in the brick and mortar and who are complying with those higher academic and behavioral standards.
My understanding of it is you are meeting academic requirements, and that part of CASA stands. So I'm missing, I think we're coming for two different places on the academic requirement, because those schools are accredited. So in theory, we should all be about the same level of academic standards.
But the bill only requires them, it says that there are no expectations other than requiring that minimum one course enrollment.
No, that's not quite right, but let's not go into
so
all of that.
Maybe there's some clarification that needs to happen.
No, it's in the bill last year. It's very, This parallels with last year's, correct, Nick? Yes. So the things that were true last year will be true for your virtual students. They have academic rigor as well. Representative Thomas.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I heard you say public school students and private virtual students. I believe virtual students are considered public school students, correct?
I don't think the way the bill is drafted now that might not.
Okay.
And to go back to last year's provision about the homeschoolers, we opposed that provision, and that's yet another reason why we oppose this.
Okay, and you'd be correct that it doesn't matter if it's a public school, virtual school that we fund. That it matters when we fund them. and we do. We have a commitment of $5,600. But in order to let children play, if their parents reside in a district and they're taxpayers, regardless of whether they're virtual public or virtual Missouri, makes no difference. Their parents are taxpayers. Okay, well, I'll close out with a few questions. Oh, Representative Johnson has questions, and then I'll hop in. Yep, Representative Owsley has a question, then I'll hop in and we'll close.
I just want to clarify, you mentioned football coach. I would like the record to reflect that I was voluntold to also serve as the Scholars Bowl coach
Okay,
for
there you
several
go.
years, where we were very successful, even beat Bishop Miege. Just could never beat those folks over in DeSoto because they are the #1 5A Scholars Bowl team. Ah,
So you're a Renaissance man, is what you're saying?
who? A social studies teacher.
Hey, well, I'll tell you, Bishop Miege may not be able to do Scholars Bowl, but they do soccer. And they beat up on Augusta all the time. And so I'm very familiar with private schools whooping up on my public school students. All right. So Representative Owsley, and then I will finish with a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And back to my question from before, to the reviser, that vaccinations, age, eligibility are all in compliance with CASA regulations. What about district regulations? And I'll let this be for Leah or Nick, whichever, help add clarity to the confusion of the.
I defer to Nick because I did not attend law school.
So the law requires that students meet applicable age and eligibility requirements set forth by the Activities Association.
So the district has requirements above and beyond what the association has requirements of. Is the bill silent upon that?
The bill doesn't discuss district requirements at all.
So the district could have further requirements, and this would also bypass them as well.
The district would have to stay cognizant that the law is intended, the purpose of the law is to allow participation of students. So they need to stay cognizant of that, that requirement in setting their own requirements.
Thank you for the clarification.
And Nick, you can chime in on this, but I do believe that parents currently, whether they're public school or wherever, if they're public school students, they may have a doctor's, reason for not taking a particular vaccine or a medical reason, and they could be exempt regardless of what the district might require. Is that correct?
That statute does allow for I believe, a religious exemption for vaccinations. So that it's just the requirement to comply with that statute regarding vaccinations. So,
and due to time, we're going to keep moving. And yes.
I just wanted to state that I was more concerned with academic requirement than vaccination requirement.
Okay, that's great. And then you had a clarification you wanted to mention.
yes, certainly. Leah is correct, and I appreciate her keen eye that there is a statutory reference in there to 723212. That statute is a repealed statute. It doesn't have anything in it. That is intended, and if the committee wants to work the bill, that needs to be updated to 3712, 723712, which is the definition for virtual school within the Virtual School Act. And I will note to the committee that those virtual schools are overseen under the following statute, 723213. Those virtual schools are overseen by the State Board of Education. So they're State Board of Ed supervised virtual schools.
Okay, and I will finish with the questions really quickly. Leah, you put in your testimony that the public school extracurricular activities, they're participating in these public school extracurricular activities without complying with the same academic standards. And I would bet that Melinda here would have something to say about the hard work of her 500 students and students that exist across our state. So did you really mean that?
I think that my testimony is clear that the way this bill is written, it does not protect kids from being cut by other children. I don't think we have any beef with any of the public schools that are administered by our public school districts in Kansas. Pardon me, we do not have any problem with those virtual schools, but we do have problems with the way this bill is written because it states that you only have to do the minimum one class. And our policy that our members have adopted states that we should have the option to establish additional academic requirements for kids who are participating in our activities, and that's why my testimony says that.
And we would disagree with that. They are not required to take one class. They're going to be required to take 0. They're going to be required to take complementary classes in virtual schools or other schools and provide those transcripts or affidavits. But I would note that Kansas is not the first state to allow this. There are 33: Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Florida, Idaho, Illinois, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Mexico, North Dakota, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, Washington State, and Wyoming. And I read that list because it's about letting kids play. And your testimony says in your second, third paragraph, it said, could be cut from extracurricular activities in favor of virtual school students who don't even attend a virtual school based in the state of Kansas, which isn't even the issue. My question is, and since you've already sat down, you don't have to answer it. Why would you consider any student to be a second-class student? They're all humans that are all getting an education. In this case, majority of them are public school education, and I feel as if your testimony treats those students as second-class students.
Respectfully, Madam Chair, I would say, again, respectfully, that I'm afraid you're misrepresenting my testimony. And if the bill is amended in the way that we suggest, and I think it's going to take some additional discussion because, again, it's not clear to us when we talk about a virtual school. The statute does not say Kansas, and the statute does not say the word public. And so I think that some clarification would certainly be helpful.
And actually, if we were to do that, it would be inconsistent with what we passed last year. And we wouldn't want to discriminate against anybody that's part of the funding formula already, that perhaps, for example, in Western Kansas, where you have a few Colorado students that come over because their parents are teachers, they get a half base aid. And so we could not discriminate against them unless we were going to be consistent and we were going to discriminate in our formula, which we do not. So sometimes we just will agree to disagree. I'll let you have the last word, Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. The part of a Kansas virtual school, is there any issue with an out-of-state virtual school having the same standard? Is that even a question, I guess?
No, I mean, it could be if you wanted it to be. I mean, if that was something that you wanted to allow, but we do require transcripts if they're going to a school. So even if they're a Missouri virtual school, they would need to provide transcripts to show that they are actually meeting the ks.gov guidelines, which are that they need to be passing 5 credits. And so that's a requirement. And then if it were, for example, last year's bill, a parent could provide either a transcript or an affidavit. And so that's how that works. All right, committee, thank you for the hearing today. I will close our hearing, and we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. We are adjourned.